Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
So welcome to Balkan Circle. My name is Mary Newberger. I'm a historian of the Balkans here in the History Department at UT, and also the director of our Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and chair of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. Kirill is my co-host.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm delighted. My name is Kirill Abramov, and I'm an assistant professor here at the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies, and also part of the center. I'm very grateful to my co-host and to our department at the University of Texas at Austin for allowing us to and supporting us to have yet another season of Balkan Circle. This season is really truly exciting because we'll be having a wide topical and geographical scope. And today, Miri, we have a very interesting first presenter and a guest that will present a topic which is very much, at the center of all things Balkan.
Yeah, I wanted to thank also the Department of Classics for hiring Dr. Nebojša Todorović, who joined UT in fall of 2025. He received his BA from the University of Pavia, Italy, his MA from the University College of London, and his PhD in comparative literature from Yale University. So quite the global citizen. Previously, he was a Loeb Classical Library Foundation postdoctoral fellow also at Harvard. Professor Todorović, his research focuses on ancient Athenian drama and its reception in contemporary Italian, Greek, and Yugoslav culture, engaging with questions of border, community, language, trauma, and translation. He is currently working on his first book, Tragedies of Disintegration, which examines adaptations of Greek plays performed during the Yugoslav wars and their aftermath, exploring how these productions illuminate the fraught relationship between the Balkans and imagined West. His project won the Durham Prize in Classical Reception, and his talk today is entitled Mapping Unrepresentability, that's a big word, Dramatic Cartographies and Synesthetic Translation Films of Besieged Sarajevo.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation and for the warm welcome in this exciting community. It just kind of a bit of a background, my original dissertation and probably what the book I'm trying to create is a theater studies book with plays, strictly plays, adaptations of Greek tragedy in Yugoslavia and around Yugoslavia, looking at Yugoslavia at the time of its breakup. But as I started researching and putting it together, it was of course COVID years and access to archives was more difficult. And I found these two films that I'm going to talk about today that were sort of filmic adaptations of Greek tragedies, arguably looking at Sarajevo from like an outside perspective. So I'm now trying to figure out, now that COVID, thank God, is over and I have access to archives and I can write the book I wanted to write from the very beginning. I'm trying to figure out what to do with these films, and I'm happy to, I'm trying to make I'm not trying to make a big argument about film studies, but I'm more interested in trying to build a theoretical argument that is also like mindful of both the classics side of things and the Balkan side of things. So just to, give a bit of a context. And moving into the talk with the films. So in 1995 and in 1998, two influential European directors released films grappling with the tragedy of besieged Sarajevo through radically different approaches to visibility and representation. We have Rehearsal for a War by Mario Martone that comes out in 1998, after Theo Angelopoulos Ulysses Gaze in 1995.
It was.
Okay.
Going.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Martone's film follows Leo, a theater director who plans to bring Aeschylus' Seven Against Thebes to Sarajevo. Artistic solidarity. The company maintains contact with Yasmin, a theater director in Sarajevo, who exists only through letters and phone calls. He never really appears on screen. The character of Yasmin is inspired by the figure of Miljenko Jergović, a famous Bosnian writer. He's the author of a collection of short stories called Sarajevo Marlboro that comes out in 1994. And Martone invited him to collaborate on the script of the film. There was even a plan initially to bring him from Sarajevo to Naples to actually be part of the film, but that never really happens. When news about Yasmin's killing by sniper fire reaches Leo's ears in Naples towards the end of the film, the planned performance in Sarajevo becomes impossible, and the city thus remains forever out of reach, visible only through moments of synesthetic connectivity. That's kind of my argument. In contrast, we have Theo Angelopoulos, a couple of years before, who chronicles a Greek-American filmmaker. His name is A. Like, we never get a full name of the filmmaker. He's only ever referenced through this, the first letter of the alphabet, who returns to his homeland after 30 years in America. The pretext is to present his latest film at the local theater festival, gives way to his voyage across different cities of the Balkan region in search of 3 lost reels by the Manaki brothers. The trip concludes with extended sequences set in Sarajevo, though the city appears shrouded in a fog that alternately reveals and conceals its wartime reality. To be more precise, Angelopoulos tries for a couple of years to obtain the required permission and protections to film the last portion of the film in the besieged city. The war was not over. I guess the war ends when the film comes out. But he never managed to get these permissions. He thus decides to reproduce Sarajevo elsewhere. The last part of the film, which you'll see in a couple of clips, is actually Mostar, the Mostar area in Bosnia. While it is not the real Sarajevo that the spectator sees at the end of the film, Angelopoulos seems very keen to draw Sarajevo out of the invisibility, or to be more precisely in dialogue with the film imagery, out of the fog that surrounds the besieged city. These contrasting approaches to Sarajevo's visibility, Martone's strategic absence versus Angelopoulos' foggy presence, offer a complementary insight into how cinema can engage with traumatic events that seems to resist representation. Both films grapple with the fundamental questions that have preoccupied trauma studies. How can art represent the unrepresentable? How can trauma be translated across cultural and geographical distances without either appropriating or diminishing the specific suffering of its victims? The film's different solution to the attempt to textualize the traumatic history of another community without misappropriating or cannibalizing their pain are apparent in their use of synesthesia. In Rehearsal for a War, we have an electric generator meant to power performances in Sarajevo that instead creates a sonic simulation of warfare during the rehearsals of the play in Naples. The sound becomes a way of translating the unseen city's experience, while it marks the ultimate impossibility of truly replicating that experience. The electric generation scene, which I'll show you in a moment, and the scene where the librarian handles Leo a fragment of the destroyed Sarajevo library, create moments of audiovisual and visual tactile synesthesia that serve as a rare bridge between the film's real Italian spaces and the imagined Bosnian geohistories. Similarly, in Ulysses Gaze, the fog that shrouds Sarajevo and the rivers that introduce and conclude the last section of the film, set in the besieged capital, create a complex interplay between visibility and invisibility, sound and silence, unrepresentability and translatability, as the city's trauma becomes partially visible through its sensory conclusion. This synesthetic strategy points towards what I term traumatic cartographies, networks of real and fictional spaces whose histories have been impacted by trauma, connected not through simple equivalence, but through careful attention to both similarities and difference. This framework offers an alternative to dominant trauma theories that emphasize trauma's fundamental unrepresentability, trauma's fundamental inaccessibility. Instead, traumatic cartographies suggest that while trauma may resist direct representation, it can be approached through networks of translation that preserve specificity while enabling understanding across distance. The strategic choice made by both director materializes such cartographies by linking spaces and times without collapsing them into false equivalences. Martone, the Italian film director, connects ancient Thebes, contemporary Naples, and unseen Sarajevo through sonic echo. Angelopoulos traces a path through the Balkans that culminates in Sarajevo's fog, using water imagery from rain to river to mist to suggest connection while maintaining crucial distinctions. So I'll give a bit of a theoretical overview. I'm sorry. Does it get cut off? I have this like green. Hope it's visible, right?
On screen is good.
Okay, good, great.
So,
Kind of cut off.
Close the chat.
I think we're looking good. This is what I see on screen, so
It's still,
What is it?
Oh no. Okay.
it's okay because you'll probably.
Maybe if I do this,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
Okay. So just to give a bit of a review, theoretical overview, we have like much trauma theory following Katie Caruth's influential work has focused on trauma's fundamental unrepresentability. It's resistant to being captured in language or an image. For Caruth, trauma manifests as a rupture that can only be witnessed indirectly through its symptoms and repetitions. While she suggests that one's trauma is tied up with the trauma of another, this framework risks collapsing crucial distinction between different traumatic experiences and the specific contexts in which they occur. Her emphasis on trauma's emergence through breaks in a mutual understanding, while illuminating certain aspects of the traumatic experience, can lead to an erasure of the specific historical and political conditions that produce different forms of trauma. As Ruth Leigh objects, this approach can lead to a depoliticization of trauma by emphasizing psychological universals over historical and social specificity. Let's see, the next one is also cut off. Yeah. It does get cut off a little bit. I have this.
Could you go back to the Canva view? Just
Yeah.
Close to the view. Sorry.
It's okay. What if I do this?
It's still.
Still, yeah. Keep it like this. That's okay. Beyond these theoretical concerns, there's also the practical question of how writers and artists engage with trauma, their own and others, without turning into an extracting spectacle. Roxane Gay addresses precisely this dilemma in her powerful memoir, Writing into the Wound, 2021, where she recounts teaching a creative writing class at Yale focused on problems of writing about trauma. As Gay points out, when you're finally ready to write about trauma, there's the temptation to offer up testimony, to transcribe all the brutal details as if that is the whole work that trauma needs to be done. Interrogating what she sees as an obsession with trauma, Gay goes as far as to suggest that trauma serves as pornography, as a way of titillating the reader, a lazy way of creating narrative tension. And she chronicles how she struggles with the question of writing trauma without re-traumatizing oneself or the reader, with the doubt that writing about trauma is inherently exploitative. How do we write about trauma without cannibalizing ourselves became a central conundrum of her class and her memoir. Maria Martone, the director of Rehearsal for a War, expresses a similar preoccupation in a letter to Liliana Avirović, Jergović Italian's translator, when he explains his decision for a Sarajevan theater director character to remain never appear on screen, remaining only a distant and unreachable voice, citing the fear of an artificial narrative device, which, with a subject matter like this, could become a grave sin. This concern about how to engage with another community's trauma without appropriating it drives the film's formal choices. Thinking along the lines of Gaze and Martone's concern, and mindful of the critiques of Caruth frameworks, I propose instead to think in terms of traumatic cartographies, networks of spaces, both real and fictional, whose histories have been impacted by trauma. This framework draws on Matthew Edney's crucial distinction between mapping and cartography. As Edney argues, mapping refers to the actual behavior, what people do, whereas cartography represents the idealized behavior, what people think they do. Maps emerge from specific social and cultural practices shaped by particular ideals and assumptions about how space can be represented. Applied to trauma, this distinction helps us move beyond both simple representation, mapping, and complete unrepresentability, which is Caruth's model. Instead, traumatic cartographies acknowledge both the difficulty of representing trauma directly and the possibility of creating connection between traumatic experiences without erasing their specificity. Like cartography itself, these networks are always partial and situated, shaped by particular perspectives and purposes rather than claiming universal validity. I read the scenes resorting to synesthesia in both films as sensory articulation of these networks of translation. This approach also restores agency to traumatized subjects and communities, moving beyond models of passive victimhood. By recognizing how traumatized communities and witnesses actively create connections and meanings through cultural production, traumatic cartographies avoid turning trauma into a purely psychological phenomenon for external spectators divorced from social and political reality. At the same time, this paradigm encodes an invitation to cyclical self-scrutiny. The epistemological filters through which these cartographies are configured do not always look the same across distant histories or different networks of spaces. This is crucial when we consider the three conceptual territories that bracket European imaginary geographies in these films. We have Greece, from which Angelopoulos' protagonist departs and allegorical returns when he recovers the Monaki brothers' clips. His voyage invites deconstructing what Artemis Leontis calls the abstract principle of territorial identification, which ties Western Europe's cultural life to ancient Greek civilization. Second, we have Rome, which is the only space that Martone's film shows besides Naples, whose mythologized past has similarly been at the center of a long tradition of appropriating classical history to foster imperialist narratives of exceptional progress. And third, we have the Balkans, a space deemed peripheral to European identity for centuries, while even though recent scholarship has pointed out the arbitrariness of the region's geographic reference and call out the poor understanding of Yugoslavia's breakup, the poor understanding, to use Tomislav Longinovic's formulation, of the US-led West understanding of Yugoslavia's violent breakup. And by the way, like when I present this topic in a more classics context, I'm always spending a bit more time on, Longinovic's framework and how it sort of maps with an argument about ancient Greek theater that Froma Zeitlin makes, where she basically says that from an Athenian perspective, Thebes, the city of Thebes, becomes the anti-Athens. Whenever you have to say something negative about Athens, or whenever you have to explore a thorny topic, you sort of displaced it on Thebes. And I think there's something similar in the way that Longinovich diagnoses the perception of the Balkans, in the US-led West. I can return to this. I think I have a slide after the Q&A, but I regard Thebes and Sarajevo, ancient and modern Athens, Italy, and Yugoslavia as spins on a wider traumatic cartographies, not to flatten or to equate them, but to show how these connections might illuminate broader patterns while preserving the specific uniqueness of each cultural geography and local history. Like bridges that connect 2 points while preserving their ontological differences, these connections between traumatic cartographies pins do not erase individual distinctions. So I'll show you the first clip of Martone's film. Let's see if it works.
Lì non c'è corrente elettrica, nei teatri o si attaccano a un generatore. Lì non c'è corrente elettrica, nei teatri o si attaccano a un generatore o usano le candele. Vedi questo disegno di Riccardo? Ma che è questo, un lampadario? Il foro di questo, ci si può mettere una lampada che si accende. Sarebbe bella se le accendessimo tutte. No, è bellissimo. No, soprattutto io sto pensando di usare il generatore, metterlo proprio in scena, credo che faccia rumore. No, lo sai come dobbiamo portare le battute? Lo so, vabbè, dobbiamo provare e capire un po'.
Io non vedo questo fragore, questo frastuono. Com'è?
Io lo vedo questo frastuono, fragore di innumerevoli lance. Ma sai, ma è un grande.
Mi piace un sacco. Vedere il suono. Senti Leo, ma tu pensi di mettere in scena così il testo integralmente?
Sì, cioè, credo che dobbiamo mettere in scena la tragedia di Eschilo, insomma, questo è un po'.
Cazzo capiscono lì. In italiano il testo integrale di Eschilo.
Vabbè, perché quando vai a Parigi a vedere Peter Brook mica capisci il francese, però
Ma che c'ha zecca? Tu sei uno che fa il teatro, lo conosci, vai a vedere Peter Brook per un'altra ragione, ma pensa ad andare
Vabbè,
lì.
questo è un falso
Questa
problema.
gente che sta nelle condizioni in cui sta, con la guerra e tutto, vai lì, gli porti il testo di Eschilo in
Infatti non
italiano
c'è soltanto
integrale.
il testo, non è che
Però io
stiamo
dico,
lavorando
perché non
soltanto.
cerchiamo di lavorare ancora in maniera ancora più forte sui gesti, sulle
Ma-
azioni, in una maniera che non trascuriamo il testo, lo utilizziamo, ma
Diciamo, ma noi abbiamo bisogno,
arrivi a loro.
prima di tutto noi di riconoscerci nel testo di Eschilo, se no che cosa andiamo a fare?
Sì,
Cioè noi lì possiamo rapportare.
No, lo so, lo capisco.
No, è
Per
la
me
nostra
un'esperienza
esperienza.
meravigliosa, ma non pensi a loro.
No, proprio perché penso a loro, dico questo. Perché noi, cioè il rapporto che noi abbiamo con quel pubblico è attraverso la nostra esperienza. Se fasulla la nostra esperienza, noi non abbiamo nessun
Ma questo è
rapporto.
naturale,
Il
naturale.
testo è un'azione.
Però io dico la maniera in cui la vai a portare, la nostra esperienza e la nostra sensibilità rispetto a questa esperienza. Secondo te riusciamo ad arrivare a loro realmente?
Tanto è una vicenda molto conosciuta. Poi Yasmin preparerà dei fogli da dare al pubblico, insomma, non è che non sanno di che cosa si parla.
Conosciuta da chi?
Insomma, stiamo
Sono
parlando
le
dei 7 contro.
strutture.
Che sono le strutture? Cioè, voglio dire, stiamo parlando dei 7 contro 0, stiamo andando in un teatro, cioè questi hanno tenuto i teatri aperti, cioè sono spettatori.
Sì, stiamo in un teatro dove c'è una condizione lì alterata, non puoi pensare alla condizione nostra. Non sei tu che vai a
Noi non
fare
possiamo neanche
spettacolo.
pensare alla condizione loro, però, perché noi non la conosciamo, possiamo pensare solo attraverso
Per
Eschilo.
compiacere te e il tuo...
Per compiacere me, ma perché
Piacere che c'è.
No, perché se tu non consideri loro in qualche maniera, non consideri che senso
proprio
andare a
perché
fare uno spettacolo
no,
a
non ci
Sarajevo.
siamo capiti, è proprio perché li sto considerando.
Senza a posto, tranquilli, ce ne andiamo a fare lo spettacolo a Sarajevo e facciamo la grande azione eroica di andare là. Ma cazzo, ma non pensi a questi qua che stanno lì, che stanno inguaiati, che hanno fatto stare in una condizione...
Non ci siamo capiti, questa è una cosa che dobbiamo spiegare bene, Cioè, non è questione di coscienza a posto. Noi stiamo andando là a fare uno spettacolo, noi facciamo il teatro e lo andiamo a fare lì.
Io ho preso la coscienza a posto.
Certo che mi irrito, perché non è una questione di coscienza a posto. La coscienza ce l'ho a posto lì.
Okay, so this is like a pivotal scene kind of early in the film that crystallizes the theoretical tensions surrounding traumatic representation and translation that the film explores. We have in the scene a breakfast discussion between Luisella, who is cast as Antigone, Diego, who is cast as a messenger, and the film director, Leo, where technical considerations about staging evolve into a deeper meditation about the ethics and the possibility of theatrical translation across traumatic divides. This scene begins with a practical problem, how to manage the absence of electricity in Sarajevo, a detail Martone learned from Susan Sontag's experience. Leo proposes using an electric generator that would serve a dual purpose, providing actual power in Sarajevo while functioning as a war sound effect during Italian rehearsals. This practical solution becomes a metaphor for the film's larger preoccupation with translation and representation, particularly through its engagement with synesthesia. The scene's pivotal moment occurs when Luisiella interrupts the technical discussion to recite a line from the Aeschylus' play, where battle noise is synesthetically presented as visible. I see the din, I see this commotion. This moment of literary synesthesia, where sound becomes sights, introduces a crucial theoretical thread about the possibilities of sensory translation across linguistic and experiential barriers. The ensuing argument between Luisella and Leo reveals competing models of theatrical translation. Leo insists on textual fidelity and self-recognition within Aeschylus' play, using the ancient text as a mediating shield between the Italian theater practitioners and Sarajevo's traumatized community. In contrast, Luisiella advocates for a more embodied approach that would translate the text through gestures and emotions into a code that would reach them. This disagreement exemplifies the central tension in representing trauma across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The scene's theoretical significance lies in how it positions synesthesia as a potential bridge across the seemingly unbridgeable gap of traumatic experience. The electric generator becomes a literal manifestation of this principle, a device that transforms noise into light, creating a sensory translation between different modes of experience. This transformation mirrors the larger project of translating trauma across cultural boundaries while preserving its fundamental unrepresentability. However, the scene resists simple resolution. The argument between Leo and Louisiana generates what we might call the nesting in communicability, where even the debate about how to bridge communication gaps creates new barriers to understanding. This irresolution speaks to the larger theoretical framework of traumatic cartographies, suggesting that connections across traumatic experiences must acknowledge both the possibility and the limitations of translation. The generator's actual implementation later in the film, where it creates a soundscape for Italian actors, establishes what Martone presents as a Sarajevo to Italy vector of translation. This vector enables poetic communication while maintaining the essential unrepresentability of trauma, supporting the film's larger argument about the possibility of meaningful connection across traumatic divides without falling into false equivalences. Crucially, the scene's engagement with synesthesia offers a model for approaching trauma that differs from both simple representation and complete unrepresentability. Instead, it suggests a mode of translation that works through sensory displacement and transformation, acknowledging the impossibility of direct representation while seeking meaningful connection. I'll show you another couple of clips. Let's see. Sorry.
Energie e uomini di Cadmo si scontrino tra loro. Non sangue questo che si può espiare.
With this
La morte
one,
di due uomini consanguinei così reciproca, non c'è rimedio nel tempo per una tale impietà. Se si deve sopportare un male, ma senza vergogna, così sia. Se si deve sopportare un male, che sia senza vergogna. E questo è il solo vantaggio tra i morti. Perché deliri, fratello? Non farti trascinare da una furiosa follia di guerra. Allontana subito questo desiderio maligno.
Leo?
Sì, vengi.
sorry, the subtitles are cut off, but it's basically just a conversation between the librarian and Leo about this book that he's borrowing.
Come vanno le prove?
She asks how the
Non ci sono solo.
rehearsals are
Queste sono
going.
delle cose del testo che ancora non ho capito come fare. Ho cercato in tutti i modi di far venire i miei amici, i direttori del teatro, perché pensavo che avrebbero potuto aiutarmi a scegliere la direzione del lavoro, a darmi un orientamento. Ho anche trovato l'appoggio di un giornale per ottenere i permessi. Invece adesso sono loro che non vogliono venire più.
Forse è meglio per loro non lasciare Sarajevo adesso.
Ma perché?
Potrebbero non voler tornare.
Ma come non tornare? Hanno il teatro, i loro familiari. Noi stessi dobbiamo andare lì e dovevamo partire insieme.
Io penso che sia meglio per loro non lasciarsi tentare. Se non tornano, dopo può essere molto dura. Sai quanti nostri intellettuali stanno fuggendo da lì?
Sì, ma tanti restano.
He complained that the rehearsals are not going very well, and that even the playwrights that were supposed to come to Naples, like, are now resistant about leaving Sarajevo. And she says maybe it's better because then they might not want to go back to Sarajevo. And he says, why not going back to Sarajevo? They kept the theaters alive. Then there's this moment of breaking the wall that connects the scene.
Riccardo, uno unico. Guarda, quello sopra è troppo regolare, vedi? Pensa al vetro.
And I think with the next one, I do have the subtitles, but this is when he returns a book and they continue the.
Una cosa per lei. L'ho mandata a Yasmin, penso che si potrà comprare.
Okay. So the library sequence that follows Leo and Louisiana's confrontation represents a crucial moment in the film's exploration of trauma's representation through its intricate layering of physical space, historical memory, and symbolic presence. This three-scene sequence moves from Leo's solitary script, it looks like he's translating almost, to his encounter with the film's only Bosnian character at Naples National Library, culminating in the symbolic destruction of the theater wall. The presence of the Bosnian librarian serves as a rare moment of direct connection to the otherwise strategically absent Sarajevo, making her handling of the library fragment later in the film all the more significant. The sequence climactic destruction of the theater wall gains profound resonance when viewed against the historical trauma it evokes, the destruction of Sarajevo's National Library in August 1992.
So, library and City Hall in flames after a night of heavy shelling. Casualties were high, the aftermath depressingly familiar. In this room,
this act of cultural violence saw thousands of irreplaceable manuscripts and historical documents reduced to ashes by Serbian shelling, representing not just physical destruction, but an attempt to erase cultural memory itself. The film is evocation of this event through the controlled demolition of the theater wall creates a complex parallel between theatrical representation and historical trauma. The physical act of creating a staged war wound in the theater's architecture serves as a gesture of solidarity and an acknowledgement of the impossibility of truly replicating traumatic experience. The relationship between physical space, memory, trauma becomes particularly acute in how the sequence handles presence and absence. The theater's wounded wall becomes a surrogate for the unseen destruction in Sarajevo, creating what we might term a prosthetic space where one side of cultural memory stands in for another. This spatial translation echoes our earlier discussion of traumatic cartographies, suggesting how physical spaces can form networks of meaning across geographical and temporal distances without claiming false equivalences. The sequence handling of space and materiality develops the film's larger themes about representation and visibility in several crucial ways. First, the physical destruction of the theater wall transforms the earlier audiovisual synesthesia of the generator into a more complex sensory network that includes sound and touch, but also like memory. That very loud collapse of the wall offers what the film presents as a tangible connection to wartime experience while maintaining Sarajevo's strategic invisibility. Second, the later scene where the librarian holds a fragment of the destroyed Sarajevo library creates a moment of visual tactile synesthesia that serves both as a rare material bridge between the Italian's film and the Bosnian spaces. This material connection becomes particularly significant when considering against the film's broader strategy of maintaining Sarajevo's invisibility. The fragment serves as what we might call a traumatic index, a physical trace that points to an absent whole while acknowledging the impossibility of fully representing that absence. Turning to Angelopoulos, while Martone's film maintains Sarajevo's strategic invisibility throughout, Angelopoulos' Ulysses Gaze culminates in the besieged city itself, though its visibility remains complexly mediated through fog and ruins. This different approach to visibility crystallizes in the film's treatment of Sarajevo's National Library, the very institution whose fragment appears in Martone's film as a traumatic index. While Martone's film uses the library fragment to create what we earlier termed a prosthetic space, Angelopoulos takes us into the ruined building itself, creating a different kind of traumatic cartography through the protagonist's descent into an underground archive. And this is a rather long clip, so we can read things. I cut out the part there crosses the whole river. There's like a long river sequence that leads to the spot. When you see the library problems, then you see these like typical streets inside, and then you see the library here. So this library sequence creates a pivotal point in the film's handling of visibility and representation. We have this is sorry, yeah, this is where he enters the library. So this is another important clip. It's not super long, maybe a minute or so. Okay. So, as I was saying, like the library sequence creates a crucial pivot point in the film's handling of visibility and representation. So after arriving in Sarajevo, the film is rather long. This is like after almost 2 hours of the film, where the protagonist goes around the Balkans. He arrives in Sarajevo, and he gets to the library, and his entry through a gash in the building's destroyed structure marks a transition from the conventional visibility to what we might call the befogged vision, a mode of seeing that neither fully reveals nor fully conceals. The double temporality of the library, as both a present ruin and future fragment, creates a traumatic palimpsest, where different moments of destruction and preservation overlap. What appears in Martone's film as a carefully preserved fragments wrapped in the UN-provided polyurethane appears here in its moment of becoming a fragment, as the building endures the violence that will reduce it to the trace that we see in Naples. The library underground archive serves not only as a physical space, but a crucial node in the film's development of traumatic cartographies. While this descent echoes classical narratives of descending into the underworld, A's encounter not only personal ghosts, but the spirits of cinema history, naming films like Birth of a Nation, Metropolis, in a catalog-like recitation. When A and Evo descend into the subterranean realm, the film initiates a complex interplay between preservation and dissolution, materiality and evanescence, and an interplay that is particularly evident in Evo's description of his attempts to restore the lost reals through a precise chemical mixture, what he calls the golden fluids. His poetic description of these fluids that sound like a song creates a striking moment of synesthesia where visual, oral, and material elements blur together. This fluid imagery becomes particularly significant when considered against the broader context of the siege. While Ivo speaks of the restorative potential of this chemical mixture, the city above struggles with water shortages, a cruel irony that the film emphasizes through shots of characters carrying white water jugs. Here we even have, we see Ivo, the protagonist, doing that. The parallel between these two forms of life-giving fluids, one cultural, one physical, invites paying attention to the difference between the real impact of historical events and more abstract imaginary impacts. And here we have the moments where the reals that the protagonist is looking for are not only restored, but visible. We as spectators of the film don't really see them, but this is Ivo Levi is able to restore them and he's showing it to him.
We have to wait before we screen it. Out you go. I don't need you. It's done. It's done. Thanks for your insistence. It needs to die now. It will only take a few hours.
I've been hearing footsteps, voices outside in the street. Some time now. And the boy is gone. I tried to find him.
Don't worry. He has a habit of disappearing like that. He turns up again suddenly, like an angel of the Lord. Tonight, perhaps, or tomorrow. Footsteps and voices. Wasn't that what you said? Fog. I sensed it. In this city, the fog is man's best friend. Does it sound strange? It's because it's the only time the city gets back to normal, almost like it used to be. The snipers have to live off visibility. Foggy days are festive days here, so let's celebrate. Besides, we have another cause for celebration, a film. A captive gaze, as you called it, from the early days of the century, set free at last, at the end of the century. Isn't that an important event? Oh, yeah. The youth orchestra.
Sorry. Oh no, sorry. Jesus, what did I do? Sorry. We're like here somewhere. I mistakenly touched the chat. Right. So I don't know how to like, yeah. Well, we're basically towards. Oh. Not like this, okay. It doesn't allow me, but it's okay. I think like the only last part that was relevant was the exiting, like from the cinematic into this moment. So, like the movement from underground archive to the fog-shrouded city marks one of the film's most sophisticated handling of visibility and representation. After successfully restoring their reels, Ivo notes they need time to dry, which is a practical detail that becomes metaphorically charged as it forces A back into the city above. Here, one of the film's most striking reveals occurs. Ivo presents the fog not as an obstacle to vision, but as man's best friend in Besieged Sarajevo, since it prevents snipers from seeing their targets. This reconceptualization of obscured visibility as a form of protection rather than deprivation marks a crucial development in the film's approach to representing trauma. The sequences that follow A's emergence from the archive demonstrate how the film develops its complex approach to visibility through multiple multiple layers of artistic performance. The youth orchestra, composed of Serbian, Croatian, and Muslim musicians, is first heard before it is seen, creating a moment where sound penetrates the fog's visual barrier. The camera's movement to reveal the orchestra is itself carefully choreographed, showing first the eager spectators try to climb barricades to catch a glimpse. We see it here. This layering becomes even more complex with the outdoor performance of Romeo and Juliet. So let's see if I can move the here. The choice of Shakespeare's play is significant not just for its obvious resonance with Sarajevo's tragedy. It particularly evokes the real-life story of Admira Izmic and Paško Brikic. They were renamed from the Romeo and Juliet, this couple, one Muslim, one Serbian, that are killed by snipers and quite early on in the siege. But also for the way the performance handles visibility. We can hear in the film Romeo's famous lines about Juliet being the sun, which of course then take new meaning when delivered in a fog that alternately conceals and reveals the performers. The play's famous imagery of light and darkness is thus transformed into a mediation of visibility itself. So this is sort of, then the last part of the film is more in the direction of the river, where the fog also like reveals and conceals. But just sort of wrapping up, what I want to say is that what makes these films sort of significant for trauma theory is how they sort of challenge the binary between representation and representability that has dominated the field. By developing synesthetic strategies that translates trauma across sensory modes, they suggest an alternative, a powerful alternative, where trauma may resist direct representation, but it can be approached through layered networks of sensory displacement and cultural connection. This is not a claim that trauma becomes fully knowable or representable. The fog never fully lifts. Sarajevo never appears in Martone's film, and Ivo dies before the reels can dry. I mean, they dry and A sees them, but we as spectators don't really see them. Rather, these films demonstrate how cultural production can create conditions for ethical witnessing that acknowledge both the necessity of connection and its necessary incompleteness. In doing so, they suggest how cinema might contribute to projects of political solidarity without falling into what Roxane Gay calls the cannibalization of trauma. Their sophisticated handling of visibility, invisibility, and sensory translation offer a model for engaging with others' traumatic histories that neither appropriates nor distances, neither universalizes nor isolates. Instead, they create provisional bridges across traumatic divides, bridges that preserve the ontological differences between sites they connect, precisely because they're built from fog and sound and fragmentary material traces rather than from false claims to transparent understanding. Thank you for your time. Now I can reveal the panic play. Thanks. Sorry for the.
You don't have to apologize. Despite you braved everything, despite the technical difficulties.
Thanks.
The trickery.
Yeah, it's.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
A lot of food for thought. I see that our audience is being engaged in the chat. It's my job to monitor. Now, Mary, should we start and open it up for questions? I certainly do have a question or two, which since I'm a political scientist and this is probably not the furthest I can go. However, I saw certain things that intrigued me, and I've taken out several things from your presentation, which really kind of made a strong impression on me. So one of them, of course, is I'll start from the back, and I've put it in the chat. So the fog is the man's best friend, especially in a city that experiences, I believe, 50 days or so of fog, due to the fact that the snipers cannot see you. So basically, this is where you become sort of this very, very clever take on visibility and invisibility. So it springs to life when everything is foggy and so on. And you have this fantastic scene of people like sitting in a makeshift theater, right? Of street performances, just because this is when the snipers cannot take them out. And this wonderful sort of immediate association that everyone was familiar with the Euro wars and so on of the Balkan Romeo and Juliet. So immediately it's just really harrowing image of the two bodies, being next to each other, killed by sniper. So my first question is, when you were talking about the so-called trauma index, can you please a little bit unpack like for lay observers like myself, what this traumatic index is? And then my second question would be, what is the added value, the so-called quote unquote fog vision that you talked about? Because I think that there are two, one is kind of like conceptual, going from not being, like indulging in kind of cultural trauma cannibalism and treating it like a literally gay Latin form, right? And then playing with this kind of like, clear, foggy, that's the way I understood it, because to me, that's also bordering what you're suggesting has quite a lot of political meaning about, certain parts of society being visible, not visible. And then, you have the orchestra, which is multi-ethnic in essence. You hear them, but you still see them blurred. So in my world, that translates a lot, into how you reconstruct, society which has been ravaged, damaged, and represented in political sense.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. Thank you for your questions. So about the trauma index, the idea there is the trauma index challenges, it's like a sort of material, powerful proof of like challenging the idea that trauma is like inaccessible, invisible, that the trauma of another community cannot be or should not be accessed by a witnessing community or a removed community like the theater practitioner in Naples looking at Sarajevo. But in its sort of its structural fragmentariness in a way suggests how the incompleteness of whatever is being accessed, of whatever traumatic narrative is being accessed. So on the one hand, it says, the trauma index, the object as a trauma index, suggests with its materiality, look, here is something from Sarajevo that arrives in Naples. You can touch it. Exactly, you can touch it. At the same time, it's fragmented, and then, the other film shows us the moment it becomes a fragment. It's fragmented like any kind of narrative you could possibly create from this external perspective. So that's how, that's how I try to sort of create a middle ground between traumas forever lost and traumas fully accessible even to someone who's not part of the traumatized community. With fog and fog vision. So the thing there is,
quoting you.
Yeah, no, it is true. Yeah, the thing there is, it's man's best friend because, but then the tragic irony there is that in the last sequence of the film, the character is killed not when the fog lifts up. The fog is still there. Yes. So in the fog, he's shot. We have this like very long sequence on the river that mirrors the beginning of the sequence in Sarajevo. So like the protagonist arrives on the river. We have this like long night sequence. And then the last sequence is these moments of befogged vision, like literally befogged vision. You see some elements, you don't see some elements, you recognize some actors and some characters, but you don't really know what's happening. And then you hear the shots and the character dies. So the befogged vision, being man's best friend, takes on a tragic irony element considering where the character goes. But I don't know, like but on the other hand, the befogged vision forces a zoom out perspective.
Well, seeing the bigger picture, you mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
On the part, if you step out of the fictional framework of the film, the befogged vision seems to indict almost the spectator and say, hey, your vision of this is befogged. Try to lift up the fog as you're approaching this seemingly unapproachable traumatized context.
Which is situated on the periphery in the antithesis of the West.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But then
I got it. I got you.
Like sitting in the middle of that, I didn't touch this, but there's the other famous sequence. I think I have it somewhere in here. There's the other famous sequence where we see the Lenin statue being dismembered and then like goes on the river. This is like very long sequence and it's silent. So I think that indicts the befogged vision metaphorical element and the traumatic index, the object being fragmented on a very historical level.
Understood.
Yeah.
Like I was looking at Mary because that reminds me of a famous scene of Argolov Sophia, when they were, dismantling the statues and it was just a public
And
spectacle.
Enzo Traverso has a whole analysis of this as a sort of left-wing melancholia, embodiment of left-wing melancholia, and where history sort of goes to die for. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for the questions.
So,
I'm gonna just let it play in case,
Yeah, I don't think your screen is shared though.
Oh, sorry. In the Zoom.
Okay, yeah, I have a question. And if anyone online has questions or in the room, please do let us know.
I will handle the.
Oh, you have one? Okay. But I guess I'll go first. Thank you for this. It was super interesting and thought-provoking. I'm kind of interested in how it fits in with the bigger frame of your project that you were talking about in the beginning. In particular, this notion of kind of, I guess, the Balkans as sort of the Thebes in the West. But also kind of maybe a bigger discussion of kind of representation and sort of, because that is so tied into this idea of Balkans, Thebes of the West, because it's the sort of misrepresentation of the Balkans that kind of creates that problematic in the first place. But so thinking about sort of who has the authority, what kind of authority is associated with representation, how the tragic kind of events are represented either from outside actors versus inside actors. And what is, kind of when you say sort of, like how those kind of tragic cartographies can be used by either side, and particularly moving into the post-war period when the kind of local actors are fragmented too in their sort of geographic space because of immigration and diasporas.
Yeah, that's wow. Okay, so to the question of this is in the book, something I'm trying to explore, to tease out, and to sort of argue is this idea that while Yugoslavia breaks up, there's a network of theater practitioners that continue the community of theater practitioners, even as Yugoslavia becomes Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia. So that's something that I'm exploring. The idea of you were mentioning the thing you were mentioning about Balkans as the Thebes of the West. It's of course an element of it's of course a narrative from an outside perspective, and it's almost as if, to go back to the sort of befogged vision, it's almost as if in creating those kind of narratives, there's an imposition of a befogged vision that Longinovich says that's actually a symptom of, it's a displacement. You create a befogged vision onto the Balkans, and you say they're the Thebes of the West, they're the savaged West, because the savagery that you see in the Balkans is actually something that, the violence of the European nation states and a bunch of other things that are very Balkan-like in the US-led West. That's what Longinovich says. And this is evident even there's a journalist, there's an Italian journalist who talks about this when he says the Balkans never really begins anywhere physically. Says if you go to Trieste, the last big Italian city, 5 miles from the border with former Yugoslavia, they think, oh, the barbarians who live on the other side of the border. But then if you go to Slovenia, they're of course, still very, Middle Europe, we are Vienna, basically, the peripheries of Vienna, the Balkans are over there. And you move Croatia and then Bosnia and then Serbia, you basically get to Istanbul and, and
the Turks are saying,
But that's also, it's not just a displacement of this border between savagery, it's also creating a border with a savagery that is imagined and fictional, as a way of I don't want to look there, So to the point of the external aspect, there's of course this element. To the internal one is I think there's the preservation of the theatrical, the theater practitioners network is a counter movement to the political balkanizing of the states. Yeah, to some extent. Yeah. And there's specific examples of, there's a Bacchae adaptation that is from 1996 in Macedonia, where the playwright is Macedonian, but the director is Croatian, but the director is married to one of the actresses who is Macedonian, but they bring in Albanian people in to sort of, there's then specific examples that one could, find in all of these plays as a rejection of the political breakup, the political balkanizing, because that kind of breakup and the balkanizing narrative also strives for a simpler narrative, right? They broke up because of these reasons, and these are the individual units, politically speaking, of the product of that process, whereas theater or cultural life in general strives to maintain a complexity that political,
it's not there.
Right?
All right, I feel like we need to have a conversation about the Thracians at some point.
Yeah, let's do it.
But Maria had a question first.
Maria's first.
And then Stephen.
Okay, thanks. It's really interesting to get this completely other look onto communication from this disciplinary perspective. I have studied communication as an anthropologist. And so I was curious how to translate between our disciplines. So maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like trauma studies and trauma, it's really kind of a stand-in for extreme particularity that makes things difficult to translate, or extreme difference that makes communication not taken for granted, right? There's these channels or pathways cannot already be presupposed between people's different experiences of trauma. And so there's the skepticism that you kind of imply about this modernist regimes of circulation where images can just be replicated or text can just be replicated across these two different locations. Which makes sense that there's a skepticism towards kind of modernist representation at a distance, right? A kind of mediation, conventional media. I'm curious, what are the alternative sort of regimes of circulation envisioned here? Because you talk about these alternative media, fog, or sound, this price of revision. There's theater, there's these old films, there's the synesthesia of the senses. Those are kind of the media of this alternative regime of circulation through which trauma can be translated. But what are the actual chains, speech chains? It's not text to text or image to image. Is it person to person? Do people have to travel across borders to allow this alternative translation to take place? Is it right body part to body part? Like, is it ear to sound? Like, what is this alternative regime of circulation that's envisioned to make trauma translatable? And then my second question is, what kind of political subject is presupposed? It's not this modernist subject that is rationalist and deliberative and self-governing, that it can kind of conceive of trauma rationally and to understand it. What is the other kind of subject? Is it porous? Is it susceptible to experience and influence that can't be cognized in some sense?
Yeah, thank you. This is very rich. And so when you say like the idea of extreme particularity that takes communication for granted, or that like can't take communication for granted, and that where the channels are sort of not presupposed, right? So like what I'm trying to, well, that's probably a more beautiful way to put it than the writing I have so far. But like the idea is like rather than imposing channels of pre-existing channel of communications that are transhistorical, right? So the irony of the Yugoslav war being hailed as the first big war on European soil after World War II, which is then a narrative that was repeated in, with the Ukraine war, that sort of indicts a sense of, okay, I'm looking for something familiar to narrate the exceptionality of this event, right? The idea with synesthesia or the synesthetic translatability, acts of translation, in their different articulation, is to argue that channels of communication can be there, but they have to be forged every time from scratch. So in my case, I'm looking at, like ancient Greece, to some extent, Rome, Italy. There's like nowhere, no man's land in the middle of these two, like Greco-Roman antiquity, right? But then, of course, if you look at, I don't know, like another context in another traumatized context, or another context of communities plagued by traumas, the channels of communication forged might be radically different, might have nothing to do with synesthesia. It also depends, I guess, on the forms of cultural production that emerge, right? It's that's another question. So that's one way to think about it. There was something else I wanted to say. In the films,
like the subject that can be
and to the point that you're asking about the synesthesia, the channels, part of what I still have to figure out what to do with the writing I did on these films is the Martone film was one chapter where my argument there was that the traumatic incommunicability was explored through synesthesia, ekphrasis, and a weird moment about transubstantiation he has in the film. So those were three categories I was trying to explore. I don't think ekphrasis and transubstantiation applies to Angelopoulos, but I have to think about it. What kind of political subject is implied? I don't know. What are the options?
Like a Habermasian one, let's put it, or just any kind of subject. It's one that's not critically, rationally and self-governingly, like, right, using like, reliable existing channels.
I think I don't know how to answer this question because I still have not figured out if this model of traumatic translatability while preserving, I still haven't fully figured out whether it's, I mean, I think it's about like a community, a traumatic event, a traumatic histories of a community that's like my fear with these theoretical accounts that sort of goes to your points is the erase of individuality even within the same community. So the idea that within the same community of Sarajevans under siege who try to continue the artistic life of the city in adverse circumstances, actor A and actor B of the Romeo and Juliet might have a different experience or a different account or a different sense of traumatic experience, traumatic events. So I guess maybe I'll be able to think about the political, what kind of political subject is imagined once I give more nuance to the question of the individuals within the community, within the traumatized community, which I don't think I do.
Interesting. I just want to say that, like, this is from my colleague here in anthropology, Courtney, who's just written a book about these imaginaries of circulations. I'm just stealing from her, but she said this actually really reminds me these moments of like tenuous translation and how you have to shift media to get stuff accomplished. Really reminds me. This is her anecdote of all these movies about, like, contact, about when we have to make contact with aliens. And suddenly it doesn't work to speak. So they keep trying to find new ways of showing that they're speaking. So she studies human animal communication. And like there's like at the limits of communicability, you have to kind of, people always like, I don't know if you guys remember Contact, and the main protagonist has like these big billboards, and they try like sign language and they try other media to just even establish contact before than being able to communicate anything. So
and it sort of somewhat goes to the idea that when Louisiana in her like kind of, when she says, what do they think they'll understand about an Italian translation of an ancient Greek text that, so.
Yes, that's why she says we have to do it with our bodies. This switch to another modality.
Which is an intelligence, it's an intelligent suggestion in the plot of the film, but it does infantilize the imagined audience of Sarajevo, right? As if they don't know Aeschylus, right?
But it does, yeah. I mean, it says that there's a search for different media. So I don't know if that's, I don't think it's infantilizing.
We still have 2 more questions. If we can
Should we let Stephen ask?
Stephen, because he's been asking, and then you can go next. I don't know behind my back, like questions.
Stephen, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask?
It's okay. I'll pass.
Oh.
It's in the chat. The last speaker can go. And when we meet, Nebo, thank you for your presentation. We can talk. Appreciate it.
Oh, are we going to just read from the chat? He does say it's a quick question about landscape cartography and what trauma-informed psychologists refer to as grounding. You see that?
No.
Okay.
Maybe I can read it out loud.
Yeah. Okay, so
it's a really quick question about landscape cartography and what trauma-informed psychologists refer to as grounding. So the question is from Professor Steven Siegel. So does the material object, a text, a poem, a film reel, ground? The quest is a quest for the found object in allegorical form in the films. But what if the library, the book, the object, archive is destroyed?
So the thing is, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, everyone knows Aeschylus in Sarajevo. Of course they do. So the thing with the material object that grounds, there's this, I'm conditioned by this like big push in Greek tragedy studies to think about objects and prop on stage in ancient Greek tragedy as having a life of their own. So there's some scholars recently, like more than one, have published books about how the ancient Greeks probably imagine, I don't know, like Ajax's sword or Hector's helmets in their circulation in these imagined mythological histories as having agency, maybe it's the right word, I don't know, but having a history of their own, or having agency as almost like a character in the play. So the material object that grounds, I would have to think more about what grounds means, because it's not like the piece of the library that arrives in Naples has any kind of direct impact on the development of the plot of the film. It's more a symbolic presence. It doesn't really change the course of action in a way that, I don't know, Ajax's sword changes the course of action in the play when Ajax kills himself. But maybe it does ground. I would have to understand more about what psychologists mean with grounding, but it might be there, yeah.
Thank you, Nebojša, for
Thank you.
tackling it. That's not easy,
Thanks.
That was a hard curveball that, we got for Professor Siegel.
Just a quick question. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation. You talked about this trauma index in visual films from the 90s, and when I look at this, it's really films from the 90s. At the time when you're bringing this piece of the library and you go like, I feel the trauma out there. How is this going to play today for those people who watch today? This sort of films that need to. I mean, the trauma index has changed. I see I'm teaching ethnographic film, and many of my students, just when they criticize the film or evaluate its capacity to translate, problems and culture from one side to the other, they always talk about immersion. They want everything to be immersive, And those are guys who watch Spartacus TV show where you can see the blood and you have to see it very, very clearly to have this sort of trauma transmit somehow to you. So how does this trauma index actually changes with time?
It's sort of, yeah. Well, it's interesting because one of the big rules in ancient Greek tragedy is not to show gruesome acts. So when you watch an ancient Greek tragedy, you always have the messenger that comes out and says, well, Orestes just killed his mom and his mom did this and he reacted like that. And that's where he drowns her in the bathtub or something, like that. And to the point, like it's such a rule to the point that like when there's one play that has a suicide on stage, which is Ajax, and we sort of know it from like script notes that were preserved, it really makes an echo. And I think both Martone doesn't show, the Italian film doesn't show the death of the film director in Sarajevo. It just sort of marks the end of the project when he learns about it. And the death of the characters at the end of Ulysses Gaze is shrouded in fog. I don't remember if we see the corpses, but we hear the gunshots, but we don't really see them. The question is always one of hyper historicizing and hyper universalizing, right? So I don't know. When I taught, I think I shared this with Mary once, but there was one time I taught a class on Yugoslavia. So the semester that the Ukraine war started, I was teaching a class on Yugoslav literature and film. And there's this novel by Sasha Hemon, Nowhere Man, where a chapter of the novel is he finds himself in Ukraine, I think, while Bush father is giving a speech there and while the Berlin Wall collapses. Now, I actually don't know if Bush father was actually in Ukraine while the Berlin Wall collapses. But we were reading that novel the week, this was of course not deliberate, but that novel was in the syllabus was the week that the Ukrainian war started. So then of course, a novel that was all about displacements and the Balkans and the East and the West and this character going to America and Chicago and the Serbian community in Chicago. of course, it became all about the war that was exploding and the impact that it was having and how it was changing the. And I as a teacher in that context, I try to welcome it. There was also a Ukrainian student in the class. So I don't know. It's sort of with the films and how would they receive today? I never taught them actually, so I should try to teach them. But Martone's one is sort of out of favor. It was hailed as a super success by the critics back in 97, whereas Angelopoulos sort of became a classic, but also because I guess Angelopoulos is more famous internationally compared to Martone. So I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Well, that's the idea actually of the forum here. So
thanks. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. This was fun.
Well, believe it or not, that's the first one.
Yeah.
Something hit me, So Mary, I all of a sudden got emotional. I was just looking at our YouTube channel. And I just realized that we have started our 6th year.
Wow.
Fun.
Our oldest Balkan Circle video in our YouTube channel is from 5 years ago.
And actually, didn't we not film at first?
Yeah, actually, yeah, but the thing is that it just hit me like
yeah.
Brain, I'm thinking, wow, just because I was looking at the thematic so hopefully we have your permission to.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Because we use actually, if you on our webpage, we use it actually, we doubled it, and for good. Because we use this as a teaching resource, whenever we want something specific, delivered by a particular specialist the author.
Yeah,
we always point them out. So please tell your students in classics, because it's like divided sectionally, not only topics but geographically on Teresa's webpage.
Nice.
And it's accessible, and a lot of our colleagues actually do use this, at least I do. For certain things, like be it for country or topical, because it's a mix of experts.
It'd be great.
Historians who, poli-sci, economists, and so on.
I was thinking a lot about teaching atrocity or teaching traumatic events while you were talking too, and how difficult it is to not have it be porn, so to speak.
Yeah.
But also, if you don't give them enough, they don't really feel the impact of what it is you're talking about. So I would love to have a workshop. Longer conversation about that.
I'd love to have you come in and talk to my Ukraine students who are doing research. I think they could get a lot from this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.